Hello, everyone. Today is July 7th, 2021. I'm here with Luis Camal. Luis is a flight software development engineer for Northrop Grumman and previously a embedded systems engineer. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Luis.
No, thanks for having me, Courage. A pleasure.
So, what is a flight software development engineer?
It could be a lot of things, but uh, it for my specific role at Northrop and in the company, flight software development engineer in essence is part of a pretty large group that works on the specific component of computer software for a space vehicle. And in this case, my team works on satellites, and predominantly there's two types. We work on geosynchronous satellites and highly elliptical satellites. So the biggest difference is that if you imagine the world, the Earth as a sphere, the geosynchronous travels closer to the orbit of the Earth, and the highly elliptical satellite travels in an ellipses, and as it gets closer to the axis of the Earth, it pulls further away from the orbit. So the two axis points, it pulls further away.
The North and
And
South Pole?
yes, and in essence, that's as much as I can say. I can't say what it's used for or for what, but that's the software that I work on.
Okay. And is that magnetic? Is the elliptical? Is that due to the magnetic? uh,
Uh, I would be lying to you if I told you I knew the exact science. I'm not sure. I just know that that's the way it behaves. Um, but like I can tell you that these vehicles have, motors, gimbals, thrusters on them that also allows them to move through orbit.
Okay. So then you can somewhat control where it's going to go.
Yes, exactly. And that would be usually by someone or a group of people on what we call ground, the ground station. But there's also software in there in case, something goes wrong with the communications, that the space vehicle can take over autonomously.
Wow. And that's
Yeah,
written in the software?
that's part of the software. Absolutely.
Wow. Do you know how many choices that a satellite has to make in that situation?
Yes, there's a couple. Just because it might be, proprietary stuff for the company. I'm not sure if I could say how many, but yes, there's a couple of transitions that occur, and each transition, what you learn at such a big company like Northrop is that there's requirements for every single thing that happens in any given scenario.
Wow. And you have to be prepared for those requirements to partake,
Yeah,
even if there's no control.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So besides there being flight software development engineers, right? We basically take all these requirements, we take up all, the charts, the flow diagrams that people in systems engineering, people in, with backgrounds in ACS, which we call attitude control, right? Which has to do with the navigation of the spacecraft. We take all this information written in like long pages of document, and we translate that into software that can, control different pieces of hardware or software driven events.
Wow. What language are you primarily using for that?
Yeah, so in our company we predominantly use C, and we use a commercial off the shelf real-time operating system, because you have hard deadlines when it comes to a space vehicle traveling into space. You don't want you have deadlines to meet, right? When you're gonna go from jettison, right? When it's gonna start boosting the thrusters, when you need to be checking for, several algorithms that are computing, uh, the distance or the location that the space vehicle needs to go to. So because of that, we use commercial off-the-shelf operating system, and this is a very popular one used in industry. It's called VxWorks.
VxWorks,
VxWorks.
and that's a
It's a
flying.
it's a real-time operating system. So with real-time operating systems, right? How does that differ from an operating system on your computer, right? In your computer, there's soft deadlines because if you click your mouse on a GUI, right, and it doesn't react at that time, nobody's gonna die. You're not gonna lose millions of dollars, right? Unless you were trying to buy something at that moment, right? And your click mattered, right, instantaneously. But your
That's
operating system has a leeway to not meet. But with real-time operating systems, we talk about those, and we usually say that a lot of events driven by a real-time operating system has a hard deadline. And it's called a hard deadline because you must meet your requirements at a certain point in time or period, or else things could go catastrophically, either financially or if people are on board, right, it could be also deadly.
wow. Okay. So real-time operating systems, the requirements play in at certain points within the life cycle, and if those requirements aren't met, the outcomes are catastrophic, can be
Exactly.
catastrophic.
Exactly.
Wow. So those mostly have to probably do with like, well, even software systems probably have that too. Like, what do you could you think of a software system that is real-time operating system?
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the simple ones you could think of is your car, right? Uh, I mean, you've heard what's going on with the pandemic. There's a shortage of chips, right? And a lot of car companies can't put out new cars in the market because they're missing these chips. And these chips usually run some real-time operating system so that when you brake, right, it's something that happens within a certain time frame. You can't just brake and then be jitter or lag, right? Because if it breaks like even a few seconds after, you could get into a car crash. You could injure yourself. It could even be deadly. So when the processor takes that signal, it has a certain deadline to meet that demand from the user pressing the brake, as an example.
Wow. There's a shortage of chips right now.
There's a shortage of chips right now, and you'll hear it in the news. People are there's no new cars out. People are buying used cars right now because they're all the transferring. Most of our semiconductor chips come from places like Asia,
Like
and
Taiwan, right?
yep, Taiwan specifically, and there's a shortage there, and that's why there's no PlayStations either right now. There's no game consoles. They're out quickly because there's so much demand for it, but there's not enough being transported to the earth because other places are not doing as well as we are during this pandemic.
What do you mean by that?
So other places, we were being criticized a lot in the US. They're like, oh, why aren't they being more strict? But fortunately, we have the resources, right? We have the finances, we have the connections to say, hey, like, we want priority on that Pfizer vaccine, that Moderna vaccine, right? That Johnson and Johnson vaccine. And even though we were criticized in the past, right, we had access to those vaccines. Whereas other countries that were trying to contain the virus, but because of different variants going on, they're suffering now because they're not having as quick, or they're not having as easy of the ability to put their hands and get their hands on that vaccine.
Got it. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And that, okay. And we're right before, what were we talking about before the vaccines?
So before the vaccine, we were talking about an example of a real-time operating system, and we talked
Okay.
about the car and the brake. And
Okay.
I just mentioned there a little, I put a little insert that there's a shortage of chips right now.
Yes. Okay. And then that's the reason that um, there's no PlayStations or new cars out on the market.
Right,
But then other countries aren't doing too well because they still haven't been able to roll out the vaccine the way the US has.
right. And because of restrictions, there's restrictions in imports and exports because of the pandemic and the virus.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing Taiwan doesn't have too many precious minerals on the island. I mean, the US should probably start beginning creating their own lines of
Yep.
semiconductor chips.
Yep. Yeah, that's one thing I've been hearing that Biden is trying to invest in. Having some foundries here. They call them foundries, where they manufacture these chips and processors. And I know Intel was trying to invest $20 billion to start their own foundry in somewhere in Arizona.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
Do you know what type of, well, if it's in the desert in Arizona, that's not too bad. If
Yeah, yeah, and other a lot of those places are also good for companies. Taxes are lower, and then also energy could be cleaner because they have a lot of wind power and solar because
and
of
a
the
lot of
weather
sun.
conditions. Yep, exactly.
Wow. Yeah, I heard that if we placed a solar farm, I don't know how big the solar farm is, but maybe the size of Arizona
Hmm.
in like the Sahara Desert, that would be enough energy to power on the world if we had a
I bel
decent enough grid.
I believe it. I believe it. And I think society is getting to a point where, you know, they're realizing we have to do something, or else our future generations are going to suffer. And honestly, a lot of these renewable energies, right, have been around for a while. Wind has been around for a while. Water, right, has been for around for a while, and we're starting to see more of those renewable energies coming into, the U.S., different Western countries, larger ones, and um, I don't know. I mean, I think I have a reasoning why maybe they didn't. Money talks all the time, and certain wealthy folks wanted their gains on their fossil fuels, but I don't know. That's a side talk right there.
Definitely a side talk. But I believe, Joe Biden recently cut the subsidies to fossil fuels and the
Yep,
prices of gasoline went up pretty high. They're pretty
yep,
high right now.
they
So
are. They are.
I mean, if this is the actual price of gasoline, it's another reason to, speed up going
Exactly.
into renewables.
Exactly. And I think pretty soon you're gonna see very little gas powered cars, and you're gonna start seeing more EVs.
Yes, I think one thing, like for me, I live in a complex and I was considering getting a new car maybe 2.5 years ago, but one of the biggest things to not getting an EV was my complex, where I park doesn't have a charging meter.
Right, right,
And, that's like, if you own a home, then maybe you can get panels. I think right now, even panels are super cheap.
right.
They
Compared to 10 years ago, for example.
exactly. And so, you can get that, the panels, and even get the installation of like the EV hose. And I don't think you even have to put too much money down. But
No, no. Yeah, there's even government subsidies for that now.
exactly. But if you don't own a home, like having an EV, it's tough because charging is not easy. Like if it's not in your home or if your work area doesn't have a charge station, it's like,
Right.
where do you charge it? And but I think, with the raising of gasoline prices, and this new administration is pretty adamant about getting a renewable infrastructure in place, that we're going to see a lot more EV stations, EV charging stations in like the next 5 years. And
For
I've already
sure.
seen way more in the last 3 years alone. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, and pick any day. Just start driving out on the road. You'll see a Tesla for sure.
oh yeah, multiple
Many said
Teslas.
multiple. Right. I remember it used to be like I once in a while I saw one on the road on the freeway going somewhere a couple hundred miles. Now I could just go to the store and I see a couple on my way to like Target, for example, or Costco.
It's pretty incredible how that car has come into like huge popularity with the market so quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I kind of see Tesla as like the Apple of, vehicles, electric vehicles. Like I feel like they've built their reputation that when people think about electric vehicles, they automatically think Tesla.
Like when they think of smartphones, they usually automatically think of iPhone.
Exactly.
That's, yeah, it's true. When it comes to EVs, they think of Tesla. You don't think of the Prius.
Right. You don't think about the Volt,
No, you don't.
Chevy's Volt. You didn't think about the electric Mustang that Ford came up with. I don't even know if some people know that, but there's a all electric Mustang.
Oh, I heard. Is that out?
Yeah, yeah, it's been out since last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know about that. Did you hear that China recalled all of the Teslas in the country?
Yes, yes, they did.
That's a
Yeah, China.
huge
Yeah,
move.
China's doing a lot of things in their market right now, like also cutting cryptocurrencies. That's been crazy in that market. So,
They cut
besides,
cryptocurrencies?
yes, yes, they're not allowed to mine Bitcoin anymore or sell it or exchange it. And during those weeks, the Bitcoin market and overall the cryptocurrency market was dropping by like 10%, 20%.
Wow. Has it gone
Yeah.
back up since then?
It's gone up a little bit, but the volatility there is just keeps going up and down, up and down. But it seems that most people are pretty set on around like the low 30Ks for Bitcoin right now. And some other cryptocurrencies are actually doing a little bit better than Bitcoin right now.
Really?
Uh,
Which ones?
so there's different ones. There's like one that I recently stumbled upon, like, and it's been there for a while, but like Polkadot has been doing a little bit better. Um, I don't know if you heard of ADA from the Cardano network, which uses a different um, mechanism for validating transactions. It's called proof of stake instead of proof of work.
Yes. Isn't
So
Ethereum 2.0 going to move to that?
yes, they are moving to that. They are moving to that, and what I've learned a lot is that a lot of these new, what they call alternate coins, right? Altcoins, a lot of them are actually built within the Ethereum network. So it's pretty interesting.
Really? Like
Yeah.
which altcoins?
Yeah, so some of them that are using Ethereum, there's this really popular one which they call it the Dogecoin killer. It's new. So because there's a whole thing going on with Dogecoin, especially with Elon Musk just like tweeting about it, and other companies like saying accepting Dogecoin. They came up with this new one called Shiba Inu coin, and right you could buy like several million for like $50,
Wow.
and it's like fractions of a cent, like very small fractions, but they're based on the Ethereum network, but they follow their own protocol.
Okay. And when you say they follow their own protocol, what do you mean?
So in a sense, right, like you could think of like Ethereum, right, it's a place in the network where people can create different what they call DeFi apps, right? Decentralized
Yes.
finance apps, and that's where you get like all these cool apps like like Uniswap. You get all these things like Kraken, even like Coinbase and stuff like that. I'm sure they have something built in within Ethereum for those Ethereum transactions, right? So what people do, right, is you have to put some Ethereum to publish these apps, these DeFi apps out there. So in a sense, if you want to make a DeFi app that runs in the Ethereum network, you got to put some Ethereum into it.
Okay.
And so a lot of these alternate coins, they're built using the Ethereum network where some developers, right, they put some Ethereum into it, but then that just allows them to publish this new code on that network.
Okay.
Yeah, it's you could think about it as like this is Ethereum, right? And then these alternate coins is just wrapped around it, right? But it has its own network core because there's X amount of coins in that development. They just used it, right? The same code that they used to code Ethereum, right? They use that same syntax and APIs, right, to create these new alternate coins. But once they pay that price to publish this, right, their code can create any application they want for that fee of Ethereum.
Okay. Does
Yeah.
Ethereum
So
have
so
any, what were you gonna
oh
say?
yeah, I was just gonna say it's not like they're limited based on the number of coins that Ethereum has, right? It's just someone has to pay the price in Ethereum for them to publish these coins.
Okay. And that the people that are paying the price are the founders of the coin.
Yes, the developers, because they believe that their cryptocurrency and the Ethereum network is strong and is going to be a very popular coin. And some of these have reached, the top, what we could call like 10 percentile of cryptocurrencies by market cap.
Wow. And Ethereum is one of those top two,
Yeah,
right?
Ethereum is the second. Yeah, Ethereum is the second.
So it technically has stake in more than just one in the top 10.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. In the essence, it has kind of like that reputation. We can't say that the market cap is all Ethereum is capturing most of the market cap because they just paid the price to publish those others coins, but it does build its reputation from others building alternate coins through the Ethereum network.
Got it. Are there any other networks that are similar to Ethereum?
In terms of proof of stake or proof of work.
Or just the DeFi platforms that
Oh
they,
yeah, that allows you to make uh different DeFi apps. So
yes.
the one I mentioned is ADA through the Cardano network. That's one
Okay.
of its biggest competitors right now, but in a sense, what I've read is it's not we can't put them like it's not like comparing apples to apples because Ethereum has like X number of years ahead of Cardano, right? And has over thousands of apps, whereas Cardano right now has hundreds of apps built into it, right? But the biggest thing of why people believe in the Cardano network or the ADA coin, right, is that one is backed up by research actually. So there's people like testing in, researching heavily on ADA, and there's actually a lot of papers you can find on Cardano, whereas like Ethereum, it's all based on proof of concept. Like we wrote this works, and there's been no crashes, no anything. So and then there's thousands of apps backing it up.
Wow. And then Cardano, who is doing the research on Cardano?
Yeah, so the guy doing the research on Cardano, I forget his name, but he was one of the original developers of Ethereum, actually, with Vitalik, right? Vitalik is the main guy in Ethereum, but this other guy, I forget his name. I wish I remembered it. Um, he was one of the original developers of Ethereum as well, and he wanted to do something different. And there was a point where their roads didn't meet together, and he went a separate way, and he started Cardano, and he has been doing thorough research on it, and that's where his reputation is coming up for Cardano. Rather than just proof of concept, like let's build this, get going, like a project, right? You could think about his work as, you know, all R&D and backed up by research.
Okay. And Vitalik seems to do a lot of research too.
Yeah, he does. He does, and he's a very smart guy. If you listen to him, he's a very smart guy. Um,
Yes,
I I was listening to. I'm a freaking. I actually listen to I have two favorite podcasts. So one is called the billionaire. We study billionaire investors. That's what it's called. I don't know if you heard of it.
no, I haven't.
It's a really good one, and they talk about investments and stuff. But every Wednesday they come out with a Bitcoin episode in their Bitcoin series, and they had a guest there. His name is actually Jimmy Soul, right? He was one of the first people to jump on developing uh, DeFi apps for Bitcoin, and he actually did some of the development in Bitcoin as well.
In
And he was
Bitcoin,
saying, yeah, Bitcoin for Bitcoin.
you can do DeFi apps for Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, there's DeFi apps for Bitcoin as well, and uh, people are working on different platforms to speed up transactions, because if you hear a lot of criticism from Bitcoin, a lot of the criticism comes from the fact that they're saying that Bitcoin takes at least 10 minutes to validate a transaction. And if there's not enough miners out there right now, right, especially because of the decrease that we're seeing in China, people are saying that it's taking actually longer right now to
Wow.
validate transactions.
China had a lot of miners then.
Yes, I think it was like ever since they went down, there's this number that they use for the hash rate, right? It went down by like I want to say like 20%.
Wow.
Yeah,
If
yeah, which is
hopefully India doesn't do that too, because if India does that, it's going to go down like
yeah, it
40%.
will go down by crazy, right, right. But because of that, though, there's also been positive outcomes. They're saying that a lot of those companies are going to start migrating to the U.S. And one of those places that seems like a good place to mine is Texas because of their lower energy costs. And also, they have a lot of renewable energy there with wind and
Really?
solar.
Do they have a
hmm
lot of renewable energy?
They have a lot more than California, for
I
sure.
didn't realize that.
Yep, yep.
Where'd you learn that?
My podcast and reading. So besides being an engineer, I started learning a lot about investments, because investments is what's going to help us grow, right? To become financially um,
Independent?
independent. Exactly.
What so what was that podcast you just mentioned?
Yeah. So it's called "We Study Billionaires" by here. Let me look it up real quick so I don't give you the wrong information. And
Sounds good.
I just use Castbox. That's the app I use for my podcast. So we
Castbox?
study, yeah, so it's called We Study Billionaires hyphen the Investors Podcast Network.
Okay.
And then a lot of financial news, right, that I also listen to when you want to know what's going on globally in the world is FT News Briefing. And you get like 10 to 15 minutes of global financial news each
Okay.
day.
Wow. What do you get with that global financial news?
Yeah, so for example, like you get to know about different stuff happening in the world that impacts the world. So, for example, you remember the hack that happened with the pipeline?
Yeah.
They're saying there's this Russian. uh hackers, right? They
Rebel?
were Revel, exactly. They injected ransomware into the company where the company couldn't get any work done until they paid for these keys to, remove the ransomware from their software. So you'll get stuff like that, information like that before most people know about it because you're listening to what's going on and you hear how much it impacts the world, right? Another one, remember when I don't know if you heard about the Suez Canal in
Yes.
Egypt with the big ship. I also remember I knew about it before most of other people. I was like, oh hey, like, did you hear about this? Because they release it every night at 10 p.m. in the West Coast and in the East Coast at 12 a.m. and it's
Wow.
news for the next morning.
That's awesome. And then you
Yeah,
think, so that's called FT News?
yeah, FT News Briefing.
Okay. And that's a 10-minute clip every day?
Yeah, 10-minute to 15-minute clips every day.
I'll check that out. And it's
Yeah.
financial.
And it's financial, and sometimes they'll talk about certain equities, right? Certain companies that are going up in the stock market, and it can help you, do your own research if you think this company has a potential to make, your assets grow in terms of your cash, right? That you're investing into equity.
Okay. Wow. That sounds pretty important to know.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and for me, I came from a background where my parents didn't even save. So, investing was not even a thing we talked about, and saving was also not really a thing we talked about. It was just like, hey, we have a paycheck, we pay, our what we need to pay for food, for housing, for utilities, and that's it. And it wasn't until one of my buddies in college at UCSD, actually, I he kind of got me into the world of investing, and he was like, hey bro, you got to do this. Like my father did this and bought his first home through just the stock market, right? He was like, he put $5,000, like this was like, remember, this was like 30 years ago. He put $5,000 into a small company that we now know is called Dell, and his 5,000 became 100,000. And I remember I was just fascinated at that idea, right? Because coming from a home where like money was always tight, right? There's always you want to think of ways of growing your money, right? And saving, putting your money into savings, that's not going to do anything. Guess what?
No,
Interest rates are super low right now. So even that 0.1% that Chase was giving you, it's even lower and it's not going to do anything for you, right?
no.
Especially on average, inflation is 2%.
And this last year was not average.
Exactly. I think I heard last month or 2 months ago it was 5%. I don't know if it has increased in these few weeks and days, right? But yeah, it's definitely not 2% this year.
It's very important. That's nice that your friend got you into that.
Absolutely. And I will always be thankful for him 1,000%.
What did you change after he said that?
Yeah, so he kind of guided me, and one of the first books he actually gifted me physically. I don't know if you heard of it. It's called The Intelligent Investor by Bill Graham,
Yes.
and he's known to be like the father of value investing, and he was the teacher of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett learned from this guy, and Warren Buffett is like the king of value investing, and everything he is because he made it all through stocks and equity. And so it's like a 500-page book, very thick, very dry, like a Bible, but it's very important. And now that when I have friends that are like, hey, like Luis, like I want to know a little bit about investing, like of course I share my knowledge with them as much as I can because I'm no expert, right? I just started this like 2 years ago when I actually started this job at Northrop Grumman, and like reading that book helps you learn all these terms. There's some terms that you might not know in the beginning, but one of my biggest advice that I give my friends is like, if you don't know a term, Google that word, right? For example, like liquidity, right? I didn't know what that meant. That's just liquidity is a measure of how fast you can convert something into cash, right? And you could just put that word on Google, liquidity, and then put Investopedia. It's the Wikipedia of finances of the financial world.
Okay.
And
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 then you
that's how
just get it right there.
yeah, that's how I started. I asked a lot of questions to my friends, how does getting taxed from, equity work, right? From stocks work. Um, how do you choose the right stocks? What are other alternatives to stocks, right? If you don't want to do the research, if you don't want to do the work, right, investigating which companies to invest in, there's index funds that follow a certain index, right? Which an index is basically just a performance metric in the market. So for example, the S&P 500, right? It's about a little over 500 companies that have the largest market value. And
Yes.
yeah, that was one of, index funds that follow the S&P 500. They end up doing some of the best, more than like the riskier funds. So that's my go-to for someone that wants to learn. Just look up an index fund, get a broker, right? Some of the best ones are Charles Schwab, Fidelity, TD Ameritrade, right? And now trading is essentially free. You could buy anything without commissions, and only like funds like mutual funds, index funds, those have a small expense ratio because you have to pay the manager, right? And there'll be a
Okay.
percentage. It'll say like some of them are low, like 0.3%, right? And that means like out of every $10,000, right? Well, what is that? Like 0.3% is like $30 you pay for every ten thousand
It's
dollars, which is
okay.
nothing.
No,
And
that's
and on
nothing.
average, right, the S&P 500, based on historical data and based off people, doing statistics and following the market, on average, they say the S&P 500 grows annually by 7%.
Wow,
Sometimes
that's a
less,
lot.
sometimes more, and that's way more than what your savings is going to give you.
Way
And
more.
and taking that 0.3% that you're paying someone for just putting in a fund where you don't have to do the work, that's fabulous.
It is fabulous. And it can be, investing in S&P 500. I mean, you're investing in 500 of the best companies in the US. Or is it in the
Exactly.
world or in the US?
So for us, right, I think that metric S&P 500 pertains specifically to the U.S. market.
Okay. But I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, but essentially, right, like a lot of these companies are international too. If you think about Facebook, it's not just in the U.S., right? It's
Google,
everywhere. Google, right? Apple,
Dell,
uh, Dell, Tesla just made it last
Microsoft,
year. Tesla just made
Tesla,
it actually,
into the
and they were in
S&P
China, but they're
500.
having some backlash there.
Europe, they're still pretty strong, I think.
Yep, 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 exactly.
And even
So,
India, I know, I think.
yep, yep. So like, and like just another misconception. A lot of people think that when they put their money into an index fund, like for the S&P 500, it's specifically those 500. But sometimes the manager will also pick smaller cap companies, right? Smaller cap just means that it has a lower market value, right? Um, and that they feel like resembles one of those S&P 500 companies.
Got it. So
Yeah,
this not, so that's where you're getting that mutual fund, but those are very small compared to the overall. You're getting mostly from the S&P 500 when you're
yes, yes,
investing in one of those funds.
right, right. And what's even better, something that I learned recently is actually ETFs. They say is much better because they don't go through as much tax burdens as a mutual fund because the assets that the manager has, right? In essence, it's kind of like real estate. When you sell a property, you don't get taxed on it if you use that money to invest it in another property. So with the ETF, when you sell those equities, right, you could do the same thing. If you're using that money, those gains, to invest in other assets, right, it doesn't get taxed at that point until it's a complete profit to the investors for that ETF. But it's the same thing as like a mutual fund, a pool of different stocks together that a manager funds. But you could actually trade an ETF during the day at any hour of the of the open and close hours of the market. Versus a mutual fund, it only gets executed at the end of the day.
Okay. Wow. I didn't realize that. So an ETF is a lot more flexible.
It's a lot more flexible, and there's more because of that. It's a little bit considered just a little bit more liquid, right? Because
Okay.
you could turn your cash at any point in the day, right? If you're seeing like things are going down and you're getting worried, and like I want to minimize my losses, I'm going to sell this ETF right now. You could do that with an ETF versus a mutual fund. You execute your order, it only gets executed at the end of the day.
So you might, lose all day.
Yeah, versus like let's say in the morning you realize everything's going down and it's at minus 10%, and you sell, you got a minus 10%, but at the end of the day it was minus 20. You lost 10 more percent there because of a mutual fund
That's true.
restriction.
But you could go back up in that time too.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where a lot of people panicked last year in the pandemic. A lot of people heard, no, all my 401k and savings, I gotta sell. And it's funny because a lot of the older folks were telling me this at work, and I was reading this book, and I was like, hey, no, like you gotta control your emotions, and the stock market always comes back up, right? Even during the recessions. That it's
Yeah.
crazy to think, but even during the recession in 2008, and even back, you can go back into the 20th century, right? And you'll see that the market has rebounded back up.
It has every time. Sometimes it takes a long time, but yeah, it always is like a upward cycle.
Yep, yep. As long as you're diligent about doing your work and learning which companies are meant to be, because if you don't do your research, it could also go very south.
It can go very south. I think there
Yes.
are a few people, I've heard a few horror stories. I mean, a lot of people like to talk about their wins in crypto, but I've heard a few horror stories with crypto in the last 4 or 5 years of people losing thousands of dollars in bad investments.
Yeah, and that's the thing with cryptocurrencies. What I've heard a lot of, people that are in these investments, hedge fund managers, managers that manage millions of dollars, right? They've said that they're only doing 1% of all their portfolio, and that's kind of like what I'm doing because I am interested in crypto a little bit. Of whatever I put in, right? I'm sticking to that 1%, so that if things go south real quick, it's not money that I'm like crying over, right? Or dreading losing.
Yes, absolutely. Being financially aware is important
Very
because
important.
I think when these recessions happen, it's the people who are not financially aware who are the most devastated, while the people who are, you know, understand what's going on, understand how the economy is working, how money is moving between different entities, they're usually pretty well, they've put themselves in a place to be well defended during a, recession type of event, in case something bad happens, where people who don't understand necessarily what's going on, who aren't that financially literate, who haven't taken the days and hours and a lot of time to make sure that they know, this is the reason the market is working this way. This is the reason the stocks are going up or
Right,
down, or, is this stock worth it? Or am I just, what's the reason I'm investing here? They're
right.
the ones that suffer the most when, things happen, when 2008 happens, when if we ever have, we're going to have another one, but whenever the next recession happens,
Right.
they're going to be the ones that suffer. So it's important that we remain financially aware, financially competent, so that we're well defended against those issues.
Right. Right. And also one of the biggest things is controlling your emotions, right?
Yes.
Because if you know how the market works, there's no reason to panic.
No, there isn't. Unless you've been making a lot of bad decisions for a long time.
Right. Exactly.
But usually, if you're not panicked, if you're calm, if you're doing your research, and if you're not too, especially if you're defensive, it shouldn't be, and if you're defensive and calm, I mean,
Right.
you'll get there. If you're risky, I mean, hopefully you've done your homework, because that's not, hopefully you've done your homework and you're diligent, because you have to be on it too, as well
Right.
as well read. Do you consider yourself a defensive or offensive investor?
That's funny because again, this book has been a great book to me. Uh, Graham says that there's a defensive investor, and then there's a intelligent investor and an enterprise investor, right? A defensive investor, he's always gonna be cautious of his investments, right? They're always gonna do the numbers, see the company, who's managing it, how much cash flow do they have, right? Like stuff like that to make the most reasonable and logical choice of choosing a stock, right? But the enterprising investor or someone that's also, they could be cautious too, but they're willing to put a little bit more risk, right? In the sense of like, hey, this might be a new company. I did my research, right? And we could talk about companies like let's see, what's a big one right now? Uh, for example, Nvidia, right? This is one I regret not getting into earlier, right? Nvidia was already a little bit overvalued at $600, right? But if you do your research, you'll see that their revenue is flowing like crazy. They're also wanting to acquire ARM, right? ARM does a lot of microcontrollers and processors that go in medical devices, in cars. You can name it, and you can find an ARM processor there, right? And Nvidia is also invested heavily in. They're not invested, but what I'm trying to say, Nvidia can be found in many different upcoming technologies like artificial intelligence, right? You need GPUs there to compute all these vectors from vision, right, from images, from video, right, very fast. Um, NVIDIA is also in the space of cryptocurrency because people need GPUs to compute these computations, right? Whereas processors can't do this, they'll get overheated. They don't have enough hardware strength in the processor to compute these different hashes in mining, right? NVIDIA is also in the space of, um, so we said artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and gaming, right? Gaming is huge right now.
Huge.
Gaming is another one. So, if you look at NVIDIA from a value investing point, it doesn't make sense, right? But based on what I'm telling you, these are all growing fields, right? Growing industries. And I told you it was actually less than 600. It was at 595 when I was thinking of buying. I was like, no, it's too high. Well, guess what? Now it's at like over 800.
Wow.
Yeah, that's 30% increase, right? 200 out of 600. That's a 30% increase.
What's the reason you were looking at Nvidia?
For the same reasons, like I was looking into them because I knew they were using for gaming, they were using it for cryptocurrencies, and they were using them for artificial intelligence.
And you knew
And
they would be around.
plus the revenues were growing, right? But if you did other value metrics, right, you would see that the stock was at a higher price than what it was selling, and that's why I didn't buy, because I was trying to be more defensive.
But if you were more of
But
an enterprise investor, you would have taken that.
30% increase in just
Wow.
like in just these last 2 months, 3 months.
And
So
what's the
so
third one?
what was that? From what?
Defensive
Oh
uh,
yeah, so there's
enterprise.
and then Graham speaks about the intelligent investor, right? It's an investor that, yes, does his homework and does value, but also doesn't let his emotions totally lead him to just stick to that and prevent him from growth opportunities, right? So an intelligent investor will know how to diversify his portfolio to have value investing, but being able to take smaller risks in different areas.
That takes a lot of intuition. It's not,
It
I don't
does,
think that's simple. I
it
mean, it is
does,
simple,
but
but it's hard.
it does take intuition, as in like doing your homework and researching companies. It's basically another job. That's how I would describe it. But if you're diligent about it, right? So a lot of times I'll be here at home with my wife, right? And she'll be watching Netflix, and I'll be on my computer reading stuff, about companies and stuff. She's like, "Why are you always on your computer?" And I'm like, "Why are you always on Netflix?" So for me, right, I rather spend my free time doing research on things, because I mean, I just enjoy it naturally. Number one. Two, this
Yes.
is something that's gonna help my future and her future, when we retire, right? To build some wealth and incomes, and who knows, maybe someday we'll have kids, right? Do I want to leave my kids with nothing? No, I want to leave them at least with a little bit of something, so that they don't have to worry about their future.
Yes. That's that's the reason investing is important. It's not, selfishly to get rich. It's a
Right,
very selfless
right.
endeavor. If you're in a position where, money isn't the most important thing, you can do a lot of good for the world.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, we
So
see that with Bezos and his ex-wife. She
what, yeah,
donated she donated $6 billion from the
where did
money
she donate it?
she donated to different programs. So
Wow.
somewhere, for underrepresented communities, somewhere in education,
Isn't she
various
married?
different.
She's remarried, isn't she?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't hear that news, but people were
I think
bashing
she is.
on Bezos, because out of all his fortune in the last 20 years, he's only donated like 1 or 2 billion, and in the recent divorce, she donated like 6 billion.
Wow. That's to be fair though, he's always invested back into his company, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where he is, because he's more of an entrepreneur than a philanthropist.
He is. He is
So,
an entrepreneur.
so I don't know if you heard, he just stepped down as CEO from Amazon,
I didn't
and
hear that. When was
yeah,
that?
so this happened. I think he officially stepped down this week, but it was in the
Wow.
talks this last month. And he's going to be focusing more on research and development at Amazon. And also, he has another company that's working on space. I
Blue
forget the name
Origin?
of it. Blue Origin, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Richard Branson is flying into space soon, apparently, in
Yep.
Virgin Galactic.
Yep. That's see, and like that's how you could do your research too. Richard Branson is a big name in the financial world. So even when you see like SPACs, right, with VG Virgin Group acquisition, do your research and homework on those SPACs, and if you believe they're going to be some successful ones, put at least a little bit of your portfolio in there, right? Even if it's like 0.5%.
What do you mean by SPACs?
Okay, so SPACs are what is known as special purpose acquisition companies. So you heard of IPOs, right? Initial public offering.
Yes.
So most companies enter the public space they go from private to public by becoming an IPO, meaning that they can sell a fraction of the company through equity, and that helps them raise more money to invest in the company to make it grow, right? And hopefully the investors from investing in those, by buying those stocks and putting that money towards the company grows to become a company like Facebook, right? Like Apple, like Microsoft. Those are companies in the trillions, right? And now their
Yes.
investors get dividends. So the thing about the IPO route, you usually have to show that you're a very healthy company to go public, and you have to have some good data that backs you off, right? And it usually takes around 1 to 2 years to actually go public because of all the paperwork.
Wow.
But with the SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company, right? SPAC, they're also known as a blank check company because you get an investor that usually, like Richard Branson, right? They have a lot of finances behind their back, right? They have a lot of, tools that will help the company get money. They can raise money like fast, right? He will raise money and say, go to a company and be like, hey, you're a really good company that's private. Let us buy 20, 30% of the company, right? And usually from that negotiation, Richard Branson gets to keep and his people get to keep a certain fraction of shares, right? But in a sense, SPACs, right, let you so once they're forming this agreement, Branson opens this fund, right? He calls it Virgin Group Acquisition Group 2, 1, 3, right? Blah blah blah. He might want to acquire different companies. And in each group, you'll hear talk of people saying, "Oh, he's actually looking." The biggest example was the company that he joined forces with, 23andMe. Uh,
He
they
did.
were they were a SPAC and they just became official. They merged. So you could buy into these companies at IPO prices before they even go IPO-ish. So if you bought
Okay.
23andMe when they first went out, right, it was like $10 versus like Coinbase, right? Because it went the IPO route, it was valued at a certain number and it went out at the price for each stock in the beginning was 420 and then it started trickling down.
Wow.
So that's the biggest difference. It's like, is this blank check company usually backed up by some finance guru manager, right? In this case, it was Richard Branson. And he says, hey, like, I want to invest in this group. People hear that, they start going into their broker apps or whatever. Oh, I'm going to buy VGA C2, VGA C1, right? Which is backed up by Richard Branson. And I'm hoping that it becomes that company. Well, if the merger never happens, you get to choose if you want your money back,
Wow.
which
That's
is
a
a good
nice
option.
option.
Yeah. But it could also be risky because when people start hearing this, right, it starts at $10, but because the stock market is a supply and demand, a lot of people are buying it, it's on demand. That $10 becomes like 20. It happened with, I don't know if you heard Lucid Motors.
No, I
You
didn't.
heard of Lucid Motors was a company that was acquired by Gore's Holding, GHIV, and the guy running Lucid Motors was the previous chief engineer for the Model S.
Okay.
So a lot of people were stoked. So those shares, right, from that SPAC went up for $10, but before it even merged with Lucid Motors, it went up to the price of 50. But if you bought at 50 after merging, right, once it merged, people were also selling off quickly, and soon those 50 became 20 or $15. So you have to know and do your research and make sure that you're not investing in a company that's just going to be a bubble and then burst.
Okay. And how would you know that?
Usually you do some reading, right? The beautiful thing is that we have the internet. It's a huge resources. You could it could be as simple as like, hey, like there you put the SPAC name. Is this a good investment? You read up what other people in the financial world are saying. They'll show you statistics, right, of how much the company's expected to grow, what are their valuable assets that they have, right? And you say, hey, like this company has a lot of potential because they're very few in their space, right? So like 23andMe, right? I got a good deal around $10, right? And also, it's a company that has data of genetics of thousands of people now, right? And they're one of the few companies that has that, and they can make money from different pharmaceutical groups trying to come up with different medicines, different, vaccines, because they have all this genetic data, right? And like I said, they're very unique. They're one of the few companies that has that, right? Versus like Lucid Motors, right? The electric vehicle space. There's so many companies right now with electric vehicles, right? There's Lucid
Yes.
Motors, there's Rivian, there's the Chinese company Neo, right? There's a
There's
bunch, there's a
American,
ton.
the
Yeah, there's
major
GM,
ones.
yeah, the major ones like GMC jumped in, Toyota's planning to go electric, Volkswagen said that by 2030 they want to be all electric vehicles. There's all these companies competing. So for me, that space seems like it's very
Saturated.
saturated, exactly.
Wow. Versus 23andMe, they're already the head honcho in that
In
field.
genet yes, it's in genetics, they call it genetics databases.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a very powerful database.
Yep. And I mean, we talk about it all the time. We always talk about data now. Data is money.
Data is money. Genetic data is a lot of money,
It's a lot of money. Exactly.
and they have a lot of genetic data.
Yep.
Wow, it's kind of scary that they went public.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Hopefully they don't get hacked by Rebel.
Seriously, that would be no good. Wow,
Yeah.
what a crazy investing is pretty intense.
It is. It is. It's not for everyone. If you don't want to get stressed, and it's not for everyone.
No, it's not for everyone. Some people like that 0.1%
Right.
increase a year, which I think is wrong. I
Yes.
think
Yeah,
investing is
but
very
even
important.
to those people, I would say, if you don't want the headache, talk to a broker like Fidelity, Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade. Just say, hey, like these are my investment goals. I want to be receiving around like 7% each year. They'll find the perfect fund. They'll help you out so that you get there.
That's a good idea for people who don't want to do the research.
Exactly.
Definitely. So you were supposed to have a wedding last year, weren't you?
I did have a wedding last
You did
year.
have a wedding last year, but it was supposed to
Yeah.
be in Mexico, wasn't it?
It was in Mexico.
It was in Mexico.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was supposed to be in May, but it
Okay.
ended up being in November.
Oh, wow. So you were able to have a wedding in Mexico?
I was in Cancun. So the pandemic happened in March and things were closing down. It was very stressful for my wife and I, um, especially because the resort where we were having our wedding, they were like, by the time August hit, they're like, hey, like things are not in Mexico, right? They were not as bad, but because their data collection, I don't think is as good. They're like, you guys have till the end of the year, or else you're gonna lose some of the money you put down.
Wow.
And we were like, no, we don't want to lose our money.
No.
And what ended up happening is like, okay, we said, all right, let's just do it. I was trying to convince my wife to just have something small, right? Let's buy a home instead. But she really wanted a big, nice wedding. And so, we redid the contract, right? We redid some numbers. I told him it's not fair for you for you to expect us to come to Mexico with, we were planning to have like 300, 400 people get there, but that wasn't going to
Yes.
be the case because some people were scared, terrified, which is makes total logical sense, right? There was other people that were financially burdened because they were furloughed or lost their job because of the pandemic. So I talked to the resort. I was like, you can't expect this, so we lowered the numbers. And in a sense, I kind of got a feel what it feels like to negotiate in a
Nice.
business. And I really had to read the contract. I was so stressed. The good thing is that we have like this nice diffing tool at work called Beyond Compare, and you can compare like Literally any document, PDF, HTML, you name it. It'll compare it side by side to like previous and current documents. So
Really?
we did that. I did that, and a lot of times I found things where they wanted to like, screw my wife and I over and charge us a lot more. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna sign, blah blah blah. But thank God it all happened. We had around 140 people show up in Cancun at the
Wow, that's a
resort
lot.
still. Yeah, and we were very thankful because even afterwards, nobody got sick. Nobody
Wow.
got nobody got COVID. As a matter of fact, it was until December that people were getting more sick. Even
Yes.
my wife and I, we thought we survived COVID. We're like, we finished 2020. January 2nd, my wife is like throwing up, fever, every single symptom of COVID you could think of.
Oh no.
And it was intense. And I got tested, I had it, but thank God again, I didn't get really bad symptoms. I think the worst part that happened to me was that I lost my taste buds. And
Really?
I wish that upon no one. It feels horrible.
Really?
Yes, yes,
What was it
because
like?
so I remember we ordered some wings, uh, and I started eating the wings. Usually, you can taste the flavor, right, of whatever you get, like Parmesan cheese, right, which is exactly what I had ordered. And all you taste is like saltiness, that saltiness feeling, right? Or like when it's
Yes.
sweet stuff, you just feel like very sweet, but there's no chocolate, for example, taste to it.
Okay.
So you get all these like extreme senses, like salty and sweet and spicy, right? Like it burns, but you don't get no taste to it, and your food doesn't taste good. You have no appetite because of it. And I just remember thinking, I was like, I'm gonna die. But it was uh good thing it was just 3 days for me. I heard people that was like 1 or 2 weeks. Some people like
Oh,
months. I knew a couple friends that went months without tasting.
really?
Yes.
That sounds terrible.
It's so terrible because I was frustrated in 3 days. So I couldn't
Wow.
imagine how frustrated they were.
Yeah. Thank goodness we all have this vaccine rolling out and
Yep.
we can
Yep.
return back to some form of normalcy.
Yep. Yep. As a matter of fact, I feel like some people are just not wearing their masks anymore.
Oh, yeah. Well, are you wearing a mask still?
So I try to, and then when I look and I see other people walking around, I'm like, damn, I'm the only one not wearing a mask. It's like that peer pressure, of like society, like, why are you wearing a mask? So sometimes I'll kind of like, you know, zone the area, and based on what I see, I'll decide. But for the most part, what I heard is if you want to take care of your loved ones, you should still wear a mask just in case.
Really? I, you know, with the vaccine, I just think if we all have had the opportunity to get vaccinated.
Right,
COVID is what we were attempting to, guard ourselves against.
right.
And if this vaccine can't do it, I don't think cloth over our face will do it.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, right? Like it's meant to keep, virus from coming out. It's not meant
Yes,
for it to come in. So in a sense, it could also be unhealthy to wear a mask all the time.
ex- exactly. I've heard that logic too. Like you're actually supposed to displace some of the things out of your mouth that aren't healthy, and then by keeping a mask, you're keeping all of that in.
Yeah, well, simple as, CO2 coming out of our mouth.
Yes. So I mean, it's all personal preference. Like
Yes.
most
Yeah,
people here are not wearing masks in San Diego,
yeah, that's what my friends in San Diego say. Like my couple friends that I have there.
but in LA, most people are wearing masks.
When you go to the store, yes. I just went. So I had a cousin come over yesterday, visiting from Chicago, and we actually went out to eat in Long Beach, and nobody was wearing a mask.
Yes.
So I feel like it depends. Some places, some people walking with masks. Other places they don't.
It depends. All, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, that's why I say I always bring my mask and I'll kind of like sense the zone, see what people are. And for me, it's more like like the mask there's for out of respect in case some people feel like I need to wear it. Although, like
Yeah,
you said, right, they had the opportunity to take the vaccine and maybe they chose not to, but still, I'll be courteous to people.
that's nice of you. Well, Luis, thank you for coming
No, no
on.
problem. No
This
problem. This was a pleasure. This was fun.
It was fun. Do you have any last words for the audience or on investing or on software engineering you'd like to speak about?
Yeah, so maybe like in terms of software, right? Some people don't feel as confident at first, right? It's definitely a skill built and kind of like what I talked about investing. You got to do your homework and stuff. Same thing applies to anything you do in life, whether it's in your career, right? Whether it's in your health, anything. You got to put a little bit of work into it. And, with software, you always got to be learning new things. You can't stay stagnant, right? So sometimes I do stuff like, relearn a concept I learned in college, right? Like yesterday, someone was reading Fourier transfer, and I was like, hey, like I don't really remember that. Maybe I should revisit that, just in case. So always remember, learning is is one skill that can never be bad to have.
No, learning is not a skill. Can never be a skill that's bad to have.
Yes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if it's a skill. I feel like it's a necessity.
It is. Even, outside of school, it's an absolute necessity, more
Yeah.
so than it was in school.
Right.
Now you
Right.
have bills to pay.
Exactly. And what do you have to contribute to society, right?
Yes, you need to be
You won't get
able,
those. You won't get the money flowing in if you have nothing to contribute.
no, contributing is very important, and,
Yes.
meaningful work is a big part of life.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Luis,
No, thanks
and
for having me, Cruz. It was a pleasure.
it was a pleasure. Hopefully, we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Let me know, and I'll be here.
Will do. Later.
All right. Good night, man.
Good night.